The soft hum of jazz filled the air as Evelyn Harris stood at the entrance of her elegant home, greeting guests. It was her annual birthday party, a low-key affair, just a few close family and friends, nothing extravagant. Her home, nestled in the upscale suburban neighborhood, looked perfect as always. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished wood floors, and the aroma of her carefully prepared dinner lingered in the air. It should have been an evening of celebration, but something hung in the atmosphere, like a storm waiting to break. David, her son, was busy chatting with a few guests in the corner, his back to her, his face lit with the easy charm that had always made him well-liked. Lily, on the other hand, was moving through the room like a butterfly, her eyes glinting with her usual self-assurance. She was dressed in a vibrant red dress, one that seemed to scream of success and confidence. But Evelyn, as always, could read the subtle shifts in her daughter-in-law's demeanor. Something about Lily felt off. Lily excused herself from a conversation, gliding toward the hallway where Evelyn kept her personal things. Her heels clicked lightly against the floor, a sound Evelyn had come to associate with her daughter-in-law's calculated steps. Evelyn didn't move immediately. She stood frozen for a moment, observing. Her instincts, honed over the years, whispered that Lily was up to something. The hum of chatter faded as Evelyn's eyes followed Lily's movements with a quiet intensity. She saw Lily enter the hallway and head straight for the study. Her pulse quickened, though she maintained her composure. This was not the first time she had been suspicious of Lily's actions, but Evelyn had learned to hold her tongue, to wait. This time, though, she couldn't help but feel a sharp, cold prickling at the back of her neck. Evelyn turned her attention back to the party, watching her son laugh at something a guest had said, utterly unaware. He hadn't noticed his wife slipping away. He wouldn't. He never did. But Evelyn knew. She always knew. A few minutes later, Lily reappeared, walking back into the living room with a deliberate, calm pace. Evelyn's sharp eyes caught the subtle shift of something white in Lily's hand. An envelope. A check. Evelyn's heart stuttered for a moment. She knew where Lily had been. She knew what she had done. Lily didn't even try to hide it as she approached her parents, who were standing near the back of the room, engaged in small talk. Without a word, Lily slipped the check into her father's hand, a thin smile curving her lips. There was a moment of awkward silence as her father looked down at the check, his eyes widening in surprise. But Lily just stood there, her smile not faltering. She spoke a few words to him. Evelyn couldn't hear them from where she stood, but she didn't need to. The meaning was clear in the way they exchanged that look. Evelyn's fingers curled into a fist at her side, a quiet fury building inside her. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She watched, and she understood. David remained oblivious, still lost in conversation with their guests, his back to the scene unfolding in the corner. Lily's parents exchanged a few words, nodding in approval. Then, after a few more pleasantries, they turned to leave. Evelyn watched them, feeling as if the world had gone still around her. She could see Lily's smug expression, the look of someone who had just secured something precious, something stolen, and she could feel the sharp sting of betrayal digging deep into her chest. As the door clicked shut behind Lily's parents, Evelyn's gaze locked onto her daughter-in-law. Lily's eyes flickered to hers for just a brief second, almost as if she was daring Evelyn to do something, to make a scene. But Evelyn didn't move. She just stood there, the smile on her face now, a mask of forced civility, her hands trembling ever so slightly at her sides. Her heart was racing, but she refused to let it show. She would let the night unfold. She would let Lily think she had won. For now. But Evelyn knew deep down this was only the beginning. She stood still for a long moment, watching Lily slip through the crowd, her figure disappearing into the background. The guests were none the wiser, still caught in the glow of champagne and laughter. But Evelyn wasn't fooled. The game had changed, and Lily had just made the first move. The rest of the evening felt like a blur. People milled around, speaking in light-hearted tones, while Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, observing. Her mind raced, piecing together the events, calculating her next steps. She could feel her resolve hardening, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. This was no longer just about money. This was about something much more personal. Lily had crossed a line, and Evelyn would make sure she paid for it. As the last of the guests began to trickle out, Evelyn lingered in the dimming light of the room, her heart still pounding in her chest. She was calm on the outside, but inside, something had shifted. A fire had been lit, and Evelyn Harris was no longer the quiet, content matriarch she had once been. She was a woman on a mission, and she would not be ignored. The morning after the party, Evelyn stood in her kitchen, staring blankly at the half-empty coffee cup in front of her. The house was quiet, too quiet. The hum of the world outside felt distant, and inside, her thoughts churned with a cold, focused intensity. What had happened last night wasn't just a betrayal, it was a calculated theft. A line had been crossed, and Evelyn knew she couldn't let it slide. She reached for her phone and dialed Kevin's number. Her fingers were steady, but the tightness in her chest was a constant reminder of the storm brewing inside her. When Kevin picked up, she wasted no time. "We need to meet," she said. "Now." An hour later, she walked into Kevin's office. The warmth of his greeting did little to settle her nerves. She'd known Kevin for years. He was more than a lawyer. He was an old friend, someone who'd always been in her corner. But this situation was different. This wasn't about legal advice. This was personal. Kevin gestured to the chair across from him. "Evelyn, what's going on?" Evelyn didn't beat around the bush. "Lily stole from me. Last night at the party, she took a check from my safe and gave it to her parents." She spoke quietly, her voice sharp with the weight of the revelation. Kevin blinked in disbelief. "What? That's a serious breach, Evelyn. You know we can take legal action." "No," she interrupted, her eyes cold. "I don't want to go straight to the legal route. Not yet. I need to handle this personally." Kevin's brow furrowed. "Evelyn, you're talking about something criminal. You can't just let it slide." "I'm not," she said, her voice unwavering. "I just want to make sure Lily knows there are consequences, but I want to do this carefully, precisely." She leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "I need you to find a loophole, something legal that'll strip her of everything she thinks she's secured." Kevin hesitated. "This is dangerous. If we don't approach this right, it could backfire on you. You could lose more than just money." Evelyn's voice softened, but the steel in her words was unmistakable. "I'm willing to risk it." After a long pause, Kevin sighed. "All right. But you know I'll do this your way." Evelyn nodded. "Thank you." As she left his office, she couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted inside her. The weight of what was to come settled on her shoulders, but she was no longer afraid. This was her fight now, and nothing, not Lily, not anyone would stop her from reclaiming what was hers. The next morning, Evelyn withdrew a significant portion of her funds, preparing herself for the battle ahead. Each move, each document, was meticulously planned. She documented everything, every conversation, every email, every look. Lily, oblivious to Evelyn's calculations, continued to live her life as if nothing had changed. But Evelyn knew better. She was already one step ahead. The game had begun. The evening air outside had a bite to it, and Evelyn stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker in the growing dusk. Inside, her house was alive with the quiet bustle of preparation. The soft clink of glassware, the faint scent of fresh flowers, and the rhythmic swish of her sweeping brush as she made sure every corner was perfect. It wasn't just another party, it was the first step in the final phase of her plan. David's recent promotion was the perfect cover, a milestone in his career, something to celebrate. But Evelyn knew better than to get caught up in the facade. For weeks, she'd been thinking about the perfect moment, the perfect setting. She had to do this carefully, almost ceremoniously, so that there could be no misunderstanding about the consequences of what Lily had done. The guest list was already set, and Evelyn had included a handful of close family members and a few select friends. But what she was most focused on were the invitations each one sent out, with an understated but pointed line: "Important announcements will follow the dinner." Her guests, of course, had no idea what was coming, but Evelyn was determined to set the stage for a confrontation that could not be ignored. Her eyes wandered to the table stacked with her late husband's papers, business records, legal documents, and his will. For the first time, Evelyn felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Power. Everything was falling into place, and she was ready to take control. The next morning, she began making small, deliberate changes around the house. She moved several important documents into a secure safe, her husband's will, a few key investments, and a file with records that could be critical in the coming days. Every action was measured. Every movement a small piece of the larger puzzle she was assembling. She wanted to be ready. She wanted to be untouchable. As she worked, she couldn't help but think of Lily, strutting through her life with an arrogance that made Evelyn's blood run cold. Lily had no idea what was coming. Evelyn smiled to herself. Lily had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. And tonight, Evelyn would make sure that everyone, especially Lily, understood just how far she was willing to go. Lily, of course, was none the wiser. She'd been reveling in the success she believed she'd secured by taking the check, flaunting her new wealth in the most subtle ways. It was all so transparent to Evelyn. The new designer clothes, the way Lily had been puffing out her chest at family events, a self-assured smile that hadn't been there before. It sickened Evelyn, but she didn't let it show. Not yet. The day of the party arrived, and the house was filled with the aroma of a lavish meal Evelyn had spent hours preparing. She had spared no expense. David's promotion deserved it, after all. But in her mind, this wasn't about David's success. It was about showing Lily just how badly she had miscalculated. Evelyn checked in with the caterers, adjusting the details of the meal, ensuring everything would be perfect. And then, just before the first guests began arriving, she received a message from Kevin. "I'll be there, as planned." Kevin, the final piece. He would blend into the crowd, playing his role as a casual guest. Lily wouldn't know he was there, but Evelyn would ensure that when the moment came, Kevin would be ready to step in with the legal documents that would devastate Lily's world. As guests filtered in, laughing and talking, Evelyn remained cool and composed, her eyes scanning the room for Lily. She hadn't yet arrived, but Evelyn knew it was only a matter of time. As the dinner progressed, she kept her mind sharp, waiting for the perfect moment. Her heart beat a little faster as she felt the tension building, a storm she had orchestrated carefully in the quiet spaces of her home. David moved through the room, happily chatting with friends and colleagues, his face lit with pride. Evelyn let him enjoy the evening, knowing that his happiness was just a fleeting illusion. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about showing Lily the price of her betrayal. Finally, Lily arrived, her smile wide and confident, as always. She greeted David with exaggerated affection before turning to Evelyn, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't even smile back. She just watched the woman who had stolen from her, who thought she could get away with it. The dinner passed without incident, the conversations light and meaningless. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she sensed the moment drawing near. Soon, it would be time. She stood from her seat, catching Kevin's eye across the room. It was time. "I have an important announcement," she said, her voice calm but carrying through the room. Heads turned. Conversations slowed. All eyes were on her. Lily's gaze flicked nervously to Evelyn, but she tried to hide it behind a thin smile. Evelyn let the silence linger for a moment, savoring the anticipation that hung in the air. And then, with the eyes of her family on her, she spoke her words sharp and deliberate. "I know what you've done, Lily." The moment Evelyn stepped away from the table, she felt the weight of the room's eyes still on her, but she didn't care. Lily's mask had slipped, and Evelyn knew the time had come to play her final card. As the others continued to murmur among themselves, Evelyn walked purposefully toward the study, the sound of her footsteps steady, echoing through the hallway. The study felt cooler than the rest of the house, and the dim light from the fireplace threw long shadows across the room. She moved straight to the desk where her husband's legal files had always been kept, touching them with a sense of inevitability. Her fingers traced the edge of the file folder labeled Estate. The old leather was worn, but the contents inside were worth more than any other treasure she possessed. She opened the drawer and pulled out the papers, files, contracts, and investment portfolios, all neatly organized. But one yellowed envelope caught her eye. It had been placed there years ago, filed away, and forgotten for a time. It was a letter from her late husband's lawyer, outlining the stipulations of his will. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she carefully unfolded it, her eyes skimming the familiar legalese, until she found the clause she had been dreading to see again. If any wrongful financial transfer occurs involving assets belonging to Evelyn Harris, the beneficiary of such funds shall forfeit all rights to them and to any future claims upon the estate. Her breath caught in her throat. It was exactly what she had feared. Lily's actions, her theft, had triggered this clause. Evelyn realized that Lily could lose everything, not just the money she had stolen, but her entire claim to any part of the estate. But this wasn't just about money. Evelyn's mind raced. This was a delicate matter now, something that needed to be handled with precision. If she revealed this too soon, it could destroy her family's fragile equilibrium. She had to control the situation carefully, surgical, quiet, like the operation it was. The stakes were high, and the consequences of failure would be disastrous, not just for Lily, but for everyone involved. Evelyn carefully folded the letter back and slid it into its folder, locking it securely in the drawer. This letter would be her leverage, but not yet. She exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She had to act soon, but she also needed to prepare the ground. She dialed Sophia's number, the one person who had always understood the depths of Evelyn's mind. "Come over," Evelyn said softly when Sophia answered. "I need you here. I'm about to make my move." Sophia's response was immediate, without hesitation. "I'll be there soon." Evelyn hung up and turned back to the party. The laughter from the dining room filtered down the hall, but she was already several steps ahead. Tonight wasn't just about a confrontation, it was about reclaiming her power. And she was ready. As she gazed out the study window, the storm inside her heart began to calm. She was in control. The game was far from over, but Evelyn had just made her first real move. The house was humming with soft chatter, but to Evelyn, it felt as though the room had fallen into a heavy silence. The guests, casually sipping wine and laughing, were unaware of the storm about to break. Evelyn stood near the window, her fingers lightly brushing the glass, watching as the last guests arrived. David was already busy celebrating his promotion, unaware of the quiet storm gathering in his mother's mind. Lily entered, her confident smile gleaming, as always, but Evelyn saw through it. Lily was enjoying her triumph, flaunting her new wealth in every gesture. She didn't know what Evelyn had planned. Not yet. Evelyn greeted everyone warmly, her movements smooth, as if everything were perfectly normal. But inside, her pulse was steady, the calm before the storm. She glanced at Kevin, who had arrived quietly, slipping into the background. He would be her anchor for the moment of truth. Dinner went on, filled with forced laughter and meaningless conversations. Evelyn kept a pleasant smile fixed on her face, watching Lily from across the room as she laughed a little too loudly, showing off the new necklace Evelyn knew had been purchased with stolen money. When the time came, Evelyn stood up, her glass of wine held in one hand. The room fell quiet, curiosity flickering in the eyes of her guests. "I'd like to thank you all for being here," Evelyn said, her voice calm but deliberate. "But there's something important I need to discuss. After dinner." The words hung in the air, like the pause before a storm. Her gaze shifted to Lily, whose smile faltered for a split second before she masked it with another false grin. Evelyn knew she had her attention now. As the last of the plates were cleared away, Evelyn motioned for everyone to gather in the sitting area. The chairs were arranged, everyone sitting expectantly, but it was Lily who was now shifting uncomfortably. She had no idea what was coming. Evelyn took a deep breath and looked directly at her daughter-in-law. "Lily," she began, her voice cutting through the room. "I know what you did. You took money from my safe and gave it to your parents, and you thought no one would notice." Lily's face paled. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for any hint of support, but there was none. Evelyn continued, her voice steady. "And what you didn't know is that my husband left a clause in his will. If any funds are wrongfully transferred, the beneficiary loses everything." She let the words settle. Lily opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hands were trembling. Evelyn turned to Kevin, who stepped forward and handed over the legal documents. Everything is in writing, he said, his tone professional but final. The room was utterly still. Evelyn stood taller now, the weight of what she had just revealed settling over her like a shield. Lily's world was crashing, and Evelyn had no intention of letting her escape this time. As Lily tried to compose herself, Evelyn knew there was no going back. The truth had been exposed, and the consequences were only beginning. The room was thick with tension, and Evelyn could feel it pressing against her chest as she stood before her stunned family. The shock on Lily's face was almost satisfying, but Evelyn knew it was far from over. She had laid the foundation, now it was time to make sure the walls came crashing down. Lily, shaking, opened her mouth as though to speak, but no words came. Her pale face twisted in confusion, disbelief. She glanced around the room, desperate for an escape, but there was none. Everyone was watching, waiting. Evelyn took a deliberate step forward, her voice low but firm. "You thought you could take what was mine and walk away untouched, didn't you?" Her words cut through the air like a knife. "You didn't just steal money. You stole trust. You stole a legacy. And you didn't even have the decency to be discreet about it." Lily's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her seat. I didn't mean to." "No," Evelyn interrupted, her tone icy. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway." She paused, letting her words settle into the silence, and the weight of what was to come hung in the air. David, who had been standing off to the side, watching with growing discomfort, shifted. "Mom, this is too much," he said, his voice wavering. He hadn't spoken up until now, but Evelyn could hear the doubt creeping into his words. "Lily didn't mean for it to go this far. You're overreacting." Evelyn's gaze snapped to her son, and the hurt flashed through her chest like a burning ember. "Overreacting?" she repeated, her voice colder now. "Your wife stole from me, David. From us. And you're standing there, defending her?" David took a step back, visibly taken aback by her intensity. "I'm not defending her. I just don't understand why you're making it such a public spectacle." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Because this needs to be seen, David. Lily needs to understand that there are consequences to her actions. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one who doesn't understand." Lily, who had been quiet until now, finally found her voice. "This isn't fair," she said, her tone trembling with desperation. "I needed the money. We were struggling, and I thought it would be okay. We were just trying to get ahead. You don't understand." "I don't need to understand," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through Lily's excuses. "I worked my entire life to build something, and you thought you could just take it." She paused, letting the silence wash over them before adding, "You were wrong." Lily's parents, who had been silent until now, exchanged uncomfortable glances. Her father shifted in his seat. "Evelyn, we didn't know." "I don't care what you knew," Evelyn snapped, her gaze hardening. "This is about her. Lily's actions have consequences, and it's time to face them." Sophia, who had remained a silent witness until now, stepped forward, her expression a mix of disbelief and sympathy for Evelyn. She knew the pain Evelyn was feeling, the betrayal of her family, and yet she remained a rock in the storm. Evelyn turned back to Lily, her gaze unwavering. "The money must be returned, and if it's not, there will be legal repercussions. I've already consulted with Kevin," she said, her voice steady. Kevin, who had been silently standing in the background, stepped forward now, holding out the legal documents. He handed them to Evelyn, who placed them carefully on the table in front of Lily's parents. Lily's father leaned forward, his face flushed with panic. What is this?" "These are the legal steps you must take," Kevin said, his voice professional. "If the funds are not returned within 30 days, further action will be taken. This isn't negotiable." Lily's face drained of color, and her breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her mother, visibly flustered, tried to interject. "We'll handle it. We'll fix this, Evelyn, I swear." "No," Evelyn said sharply, cutting her off. "There's nothing to fix. This isn't something that can be undone with a few promises. Your daughter's actions have consequences. And now, she has to pay for them. The room was silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest, but she stood tall, unwavering. She had been tested, betrayed, but now, she was taking back control. David, still stunned, looked between his wife and his mother, the uncertainty on his face evident. The tension in the room was palpable, and Evelyn could see him beginning to question his loyalty, torn between the woman he had married and the mother who had always been there for him. Evelyn took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Lily's one last time. "You've made your bed, Lily," she said, her voice low and steady. "Now you'll lie in it." And with that, the final line had been drawn. The room was thick with tension, the quiet hang of expectation suffocating. Lily's parents, once so confident, now sat frozen, their attempts to bargain faltering under the weight of Evelyn's steady gaze. The legal documents sat heavy on the table between them, the ink on the page a reminder of the mess they had found themselves in. Lily's father shifted uneasily in his seat, his voice low but urgent. "Evelyn, we'll pay you back, with interest. Please, let's avoid any more legal action. This can all be settled quietly, without further embarrassment." Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood tall, her expression cold, unwavering. "Money doesn't fix this," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You think paying me back will erase the betrayal? The trust you've broken?" Lily's mother chimed in, her voice high with desperation. "We'll fix it. We'll make it right, Evelyn. Just, please, don't do this." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Lily, who was now avoiding her gaze, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She wasn't crying, but her silence spoke volumes. "No," Evelyn said sharply. "This isn't something you can just pay off. What you did goes beyond money. It's about respect. It's about trust." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "And I want more than just your money. I want an apology, a public acknowledgement of what you've done." Lily's father looked stunned. What do you mean, a public apology?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I want Lily to stand in front of everyone she's lied to and admit what she's done. I want her to take full responsibility for her actions, not just to me, but to everyone she's deceived." David, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood, his frustration boiling over. "Mom, this is ridiculous," he exclaimed. "You're making this so much worse than it needs to be. Lily's already offering to pay you back. Why can't you just accept that and move on?" Evelyn's gaze locked onto David, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "Because, David, actions have consequences. Your wife thought she could take what wasn't hers and walk away. I'm not letting that happen." David's face reddened, his hands clenched at his sides. "She's sorry, okay? She made a mistake. Can't you just forgive her and move on?" Evelyn's face softened for a brief moment, but her voice remained firm. "I can forgive David, but that doesn't mean I'll forget, and it doesn't mean there won't be consequences." The room fell silent again. Evelyn's words lingered, sharp and undeniable. Lily's parents sat in stunned silence, unable to argue further. David, still seething, cast a last uncertain glance at his wife. Evelyn turned back to Lily, her expression resolute. "You've made your bed, Lily. Now you'll lie in it." And with that, the final ultimatum had been given. The true cost of betrayal was laid bare. Lily sat motionless, her face pale and contorted with guilt. The words she had been avoiding all night spilled out now, weak and hesitant. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was just trying to secure our future, David's future, I thought. I thought if I could just fix things, everything would be okay." Evelyn watched her daughter-in-law with an icy calmness, listening but not reacting. There was no satisfaction in hearing the remorse in Lily's voice, only the bitter taste of betrayal. "I thought taking the money was the only way," Lily continued, her hands shaking as she wrung them together. "We were struggling. We just needed a little help, just a bit to get ahead." Evelyn's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You didn't just take money, Lily. You took something more: trust, loyalty, and family. You think I should accept that because you were struggling?" Lily's face crumpled at the words. But Evelyn didn't care. The weight of what had been stolen was far more than a financial loss. "I didn't think it through," Lily stammered. "I was desperate, and I made a mistake. I know I've hurt you, Evelyn. I know I've hurt this family, and I am sorry." Evelyn remained silent, watching her with cold eyes. There was no forgiveness in her yet. Lily had broken more than just a rule. She'd shattered the very foundation of what mattered most. Evelyn turned slowly to her son, David, whose face was flushed with discomfort. His eyes darted back and forth, unable to settle on any one thing. "And you, David?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet but heavy with accusation. "Do you condone this?" David froze. His hands tightened at his sides. And for a moment, Evelyn saw the conflict in his eyes. He glanced at Lily, then back to his mother, his mouth opening and closing like he was struggling to find words. I don't know what to say, Mom," he muttered. "Lily's my wife. She's sorry." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "Sorry? Sorry doesn't erase what she did, David. You can't just brush this off because she's your wife. You've got to choose where your loyalty lies." David took a shaky breath, the strain in his face deepening. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do anymore." "Actions have consequences, David," Evelyn said, her voice unwavering. "You can't pretend this didn't happen. You can't let her off the hook because she's sorry. There are consequences to betraying family." David looked down, guilt clouding his face. Evelyn felt a pang of regret in her chest, but she didn't soften. She couldn't. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, as the weight of the situation sank into them all. Lily looked between them, her lips quivering, but not a word escaped. David was lost in thought, torn between the woman he had married and the mother who had always stood by him. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, her voice firm, resolute. "You've made your choices, Lily, and now you will face them." The room grew quieter, and for the first time that night, Evelyn allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had been broken. The room held its breath. Lily stood frozen, her eyes wide, as the weight of Evelyn's words began to sink in. Her carefully constructed facade of confidence, the smug assurance she had carried all evening, was shattering. The reality of her betrayal was far more than she could have ever anticipated. Her hands, which had gripped the armrest tightly moments ago, now hung limp at her sides, trembling. David's gaze shifted between his wife and his mother, torn, as the tension in his chest seemed to grow heavier. He opened his mouth, but no words came at first. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. His eyes narrowed, but there was no escaping the truth anymore. The battle between loyalty and righteousness had reached its breaking point. "I can't keep defending you, Lily," David finally said, his voice low but cutting through the silence like a blade. His words weren't angry, just resigned, like a man who had reached the limits of his ability to pretend. Lily's eyes widened. "David, no, please," she started, her voice quivering with desperation. "I thought I was doing what was best for us. I thought if I could just get enough to fix things." "Fix things?" David interrupted, his voice hardening. "You didn't fix anything. You made everything worse. You stole from my mother, from us." He shook his head, his face set with a kind of painful clarity. "I'm sorry, Lily, but I can't stand by you anymore." The words hit her like a slap. Lily's mouth moved, but no sound escaped. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, as if she couldn't quite catch her breath. The confident, ambitious woman she had been moments ago was slipping away, leaving nothing but the shattered remnants of her actions. Evelyn stood, her posture rigid, watching the destruction unfold before her. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling, but every moment of it was necessary. She had waited for this, for David to see the truth, and now that he had, Evelyn wouldn't let him forget it. "Lily," Evelyn spoke coldly, her voice cutting through the room, "you've lost everything. You may have thought you could walk away unscathed, but you're wrong. The money you took? It's gone, under my control now, and you will never touch it." Lily's face drained of color as the finality of Evelyn's words hit her. She opened her mouth to protest, but there was nothing left to say. Her attempts to salvage her reputation, to twist the narrative in her favor, had crumbled entirely in front of her. David stepped away from her, turning to face his mother fully. He looked lost, a man divided between his wife and his mother. But his words now came with a clear edge. "I've stood by her. I've tried to make it work, but I can't anymore, Mom." Evelyn's eyes softened just for a moment before hardening again. "It's too late, David. Actions have consequences." The room went silent once more. The tension, thick and suffocating, seemed to hang in the air, like the calm before a storm that had already passed. The family dynamics had shifted irreversibly, and Lily, now standing alone, was the one left to bear the weight of her own destruction. She had no more allies, no more excuses, only the cold, crushing silence of the consequences she had created. The silence in the room was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. Lily stood frozen, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. The plea she had tried to form, the words to salvage whatever was left, had already slipped beyond her reach. The family she had once thought she could control, manipulate, now stood against her. The walls she had built around her shattered, leaving her exposed. David's gaze flicked between his wife and his mother, the weight of the situation pulling at him like a heavy anchor. His body was taut, every muscle strained under the pressure. He looked lost, caught between two people he loved, each one pulling in a different direction. "I can't keep defending you, Lily," he said, his voice low but steady, breaking the tension in the room. "What you did was wrong. I can't ignore that anymore." His words were not harsh, but the finality in them cut through the silence. He was torn, but there was no going back now. Lily's face crumpled as the weight of his words hit her. She took a step forward, but David didn't move. "David, please. We can fix this. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted to make things right." David shook his head, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You didn't fix anything. You only made it worse. You betrayed my mother. You took what wasn't yours." His voice cracked with the strain of his emotions, but he stood his ground. "I can't be part of this anymore." Lily's voice trembled with desperation. "David, please. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best for us, our future." Evelyn stood silently, watching, her expression cold and unwavering. She had waited for this moment, for David to see the truth, to see what Lily had done. Her heart felt heavy, but there was no room for softness now. This was the breaking point. This was the moment when everything changed. "Lily," Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos, steady and unyielding. "You've lost everything. The money you took? It's no longer yours. It's under my control now. You'll never touch it again." Lily's face drained of color, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "No, no, please. Don't do this to us." David stood still, his gaze flicking from his mother to his wife. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath as he made his choice. Slowly, he turned to his mother, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't keep pretending. I can't defend her anymore. What she did was wrong." Lily's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "David, don't," she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. Evelyn's gaze hardened, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. "It's too late for apologies, Lily. You've made your bed. Now, you will lie in it." David's face was a mixture of pain and resolution. "I'm sorry, Lily, but I can't stand by you. Not anymore." The finality of his words echoed in the silence. Evelyn took a deep breath, knowing that the family had fractured beyond repair. The last thread of loyalty David had held onto had snapped, and Lily stood there, left alone, as the consequences of her actions crushed everything she had once believed she could control. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavy in the house, but Evelyn didn't feel the need to rush. She moved through the space with calm precision, every action deliberate. The legal actions she'd set into motion were now unfolding, with the slow inevitability of a storm. Lily's money had been returned slowly at first, then all at once. Each payment, rejected and reissued under tighter terms, felt like a small victory. But Evelyn knew it wasn't just about the money. The real battle had already been won. David had been quiet since their last conversation. He didn't reach out again after his apology, and Evelyn wasn't surprised. She could feel the tension in the air every time she passed him, but he no longer seemed to have the words to make it right. His silence was the admission she needed. He'd seen the truth, and it had changed him. Lily, on the other hand, had retreated into herself. The facade she had worn so carefully for so long was in tatters. The phone calls had stopped. The invitations, once so frequent, had dried up. Her world, once filled with the illusion of control, was now a quiet place of loneliness. The whispers had started. People spoke of her behind her back, their voices soft but certain. Evelyn sat in her study. The legal documents spread out before her. Kevin had already reviewed everything. The case was airtight, and she would be moving forward with it. The estate, which Lily had thought was hers to manipulate, now belonged to Evelyn, entirely under her control. She had been right all along, and now the evidence of Lily's betrayal would be laid bare for everyone to see. Evelyn had been patient, but now there was no need for patience anymore. The game was over. The phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her from her thoughts. It was David. For a moment, she didn't reach for it. She had seen enough. She had made her choice. When she finally picked up, his voice was quiet, tentative. "Mom, can we talk?" Evelyn's heart clenched. She knew what he would say. He wanted her to soften, to open a door that was already closed. But that door had been locked for a reason. "I don't know if there's anything left to say, David," she replied, her voice calm but final. "Lily made her choices, and so did you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, David's voice broke through, hesitant. "I'm sorry. I was blind. I was too wrapped up in her." Evelyn sighed softly, her heart heavy. "You don't have to apologize to me, David. You need to apologize to yourself. You let her take more than you knew." The silence lingered a moment longer before David spoke again, this time with more certainty. "I'll fix this, Mom. I will." But Evelyn didn't answer. She had already made her peace. The final move was hers. The days after the storm passed quickly, each one filled with a quiet sense of relief. Evelyn didn't rush to make grand decisions. She didn't need to. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself the luxury of stillness. The weight that had settled into her chest heavy with the demands of family, betrayal, and loss was finally lifting. The world outside her window was still turning, but Evelyn felt like she was seeing it clearly for the first time. She stood in front of the mirror one morning, her reflection looking back at her with a quiet strength. Her hair was slightly graying at the temples now, and the fine lines on her face deepened when she smiled, but there was no mistaking the determination in her eyes. It was a look she hadn't seen in herself in years, not since before David and Lily had come into her life with their needs, their lies. But now, the calm was hers, and the choices were hers too. She walked through the house with a newfound ease. The walls felt different now, empty of the tension that had once permeated every room. David had been distant, trying to make sense of his actions, but Evelyn had long since stopped waiting for him to find the answers. He had made his choices, and so had she. There was no going back, and perhaps, for the first time, Evelyn realized she didn't want to. Olivia, her granddaughter, had become her quiet strength. The little girl, once so unsure about the shifting family dynamics, was growing into her own understanding of the world. She spent more time with Evelyn now, asking questions about the past and what it meant to be strong. Evelyn answered with care, but without the hesitation that once marked her every word. "Grandma, what does it mean to be strong?" Olivia asked one evening, as they sat together on the porch. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the yard, and Evelyn found herself reflecting not just on the question, but on the journey it had taken her to get here. "To be strong, Olivia," Evelyn said softly, "is to know who you are, and to stand by it, even when everyone around you tells you to bend. It's about standing up for what you believe, even when it's hard, even when it means walking away from people you thought you couldn't live without." Olivia seemed to absorb the words, her young face serious, as if she understood the depth of them. Evelyn felt a small sense of pride bloom in her chest. She had made sure that Olivia would grow up with the right kind of lessons, the ones that made her see beyond manipulation, beyond surface-level charm. Strength was not about domination or force. It was about integrity, and Evelyn had no intention of teaching her anything less. As weeks passed, the quiet tension around David and Lily faded into the background. David had started attending therapy on his own, trying to make sense of his marriage, of his choices. Evelyn didn't hold any illusions about reconciliation. She knew David was trying to repair his broken pieces, but she also knew he had a long way to go before he could truly see the damage that had been done. Lily, once a looming presence in Evelyn's life, was nothing now but a memory. She had faded out of their world, the whispers about her growing more distant. Her attempts to rebuild her own life were marked by failure after failure. Her reputation tarnished beyond repair. Evelyn didn't need to check on her. She had done her part. The truth had already taken root, and Lily could not escape it. Evelyn took control of her finances, overseeing everything with a keen eye. She started looking into investment opportunities, something she had put off for years, thinking of the future she wanted to build, not for anyone else, but for herself. She had never been one for indulgence. But now, she saw the possibility of small luxuries. She even considered traveling, something she'd always dreamed of, but had always put aside for others. Now, there was nothing holding her back. But the greatest shift was in her own sense of self. She no longer felt the need to explain herself to anyone. The pieces of her life that had been scattered by years of neglect were slowly coming back together. She was whole again. And as she sat by the window one evening, watching the last light of the day flicker out across the horizon, Evelyn knew that, for the first time in a long time, she was truly free. The world outside had changed, but it no longer mattered. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, and the foundation was stronger than ever. With each day, Evelyn felt herself becoming more the person she had once been, the woman who knew her worth, who never allowed herself to be swayed. And for the first time, she smiled genuinely, without the weight of anyone else's expectations hanging on her. The future was hers, and she would embrace it fully. Evelyn sat at her desk, the soft glow of her lamp illuminating the papers in front of her, but her mind was far from the clutter of documents. The world beyond her windows had changed, and she was no longer an observer. She was a participant. The decisions she had made, the actions she had taken, had set something in motion, a chain of events that would echo far beyond her own life. For the first time in a long while, she could feel the weight of her own power, and it didn't make her arrogant. It made her calm. Her story had spread, in whispers at first, then with increasing volume. News outlets had picked it up, blogs had written about it, and soon, social media buzzed with the tale of Evelyn Harris widowed, betrayed, and now standing tall. They called it a victory for women, a stand against manipulation and deceit. But it wasn't about revenge for Evelyn, it was about reclaiming her life. Her phone buzzed again. Another request for an interview, another invitation to speak at a conference. Evelyn had thought about those first few offers, dismissing them at first. But now she recognized the significance. Her pain, her strength, and her resolution were touching lives, igniting something in people who had been silenced for far too long. Her first public speaking engagement was in a modest conference room, an event organized by a women's support group. The turnout exceeded their expectations. Evelyn stood before them, her heart pounding but steady. She'd never considered herself a public speaker, but she wasn't there to give a performance. She was there to share the truth, to give others the strength she had found in herself. "It's not easy," she began, her voice carrying in the silent room. "To walk away from everything you thought you knew. To face betrayal so deep that it shakes you to your core. But sometimes, that's the moment you realize what you're really made of." The room was silent as Evelyn spoke, her story unfolding before them. Women who had been quietly holding on to their own pain now let it surface, their eyes filled with understanding. She told them about the lies, the manipulation, the heartache. But she also told them about the strength it took to stand up and say, "No more." By the time the event ended, she was surrounded by women offering hugs, tears in their eyes, gratitude in their voices. It was overwhelming, but it wasn't about them, it was about her. Evelyn realized, as she listened to the women speak, that her journey wasn't just hers anymore. She had become a beacon for those who had been betrayed, abandoned, silenced. Meanwhile, Lily's attempts to rebuild had faltered. Her reputation, once carefully crafted, was now in ruins. She tried to re-enter the social circles she had once dominated, but the whispers followed her. The betrayal was no longer a secret, and people weren't as forgiving as she'd hoped. Attempts at career reinvention were met with skepticism. She was no longer the charming, ambitious woman she had been. She was a cautionary tale. Lily's world had turned upside down, but Evelyn had already moved on, her path forward clear. The victory wasn't in seeing Lily falter. It was in knowing that Evelyn had reclaimed her life, that, in the end, it was her story that mattered. She didn't need Lily or David to validate her existence. David, meanwhile, had been forced to come to terms with his own actions. His relationship with his wife had fallen apart completely, and the fallout was severe. He had started seeing a therapist, trying to understand where he had gone wrong. But Evelyn knew that no amount of therapy could fix the cracks in his character. The damage had been done. His marriage had been built on deception, and now he was trying to rebuild. But the foundation was gone. For all his efforts, David was still struggling to find himself. He reached out to Evelyn a few times, but she no longer felt the need to engage. The door had closed, and with it, the years of living under someone else's expectations. She had made her peace with him, but they were no longer part of each other's future. Lily and David faded from her life, their once significant roles shrinking into distant memories. The only thing Evelyn had left was her newfound strength and the people who were now looking to her for guidance. It was a new beginning, one she had fought for, one she would never let go of. As the sun set over her house one evening, Evelyn sat in the garden, watching the light fade. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. The past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She had rebuilt herself, stronger than before, and now the future was hers to embrace. She leaned back, smiling softly to herself. She had fought the hardest battle, and she had won. The world might never understand the depth of her journey, but she didn't need them to. Evelyn knew who she was now, and that was all that mattered. Evelyn felt the weight of the past lift off her shoulders in ways she hadn't anticipated. The house, once filled with tension and betrayal, now stood as a peaceful sanctuary. Every corner of it was a reminder of what she had endured, but also a testament to her strength. It was time to move on, to step away from the ghosts of yesterday and into the freedom she had fought so hard to reclaim. One morning, she closed the door behind her, suitcase in hand, and didn't look back. For the first time in years, Evelyn was alone, but in the best possible way. She didn't have to answer to anyone, didn't have to compromise, didn't have to explain herself. She was simply free. She'd spent decades putting others before herself, her family, her son, her daughter-in-law, even the community. But now, the world was hers to explore, her own future to build. She had booked a ticket to a small seaside town in Italy, a place she had long dreamed of visiting. As she walked along the cobbled streets, the sounds of waves crashing against the shore, Evelyn felt a quiet exhilaration. It was the thrill of something entirely new. Each step was a declaration of independence, a celebration of her own strength. The local cafes, the unfamiliar language, the vibrant colors of the market stalls, it was all so different. And yet, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She spent her days walking, learning, meeting new people who didn't know her story, who didn't see her as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had chosen to rebuild her life. It was liberating. Evelyn wasn't just a tourist in this new chapter. She was a participant in her own life, no longer waiting for permission or validation from anyone. Every conversation was a reminder of the new life she was creating, one full of possibility and freedom. She reveled in it. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat at a sunlit cafe near the coast, sipping coffee and watching the boats drift lazily by, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, curious. The message was from a woman named Anna, and it read, I've been following your story for months. Your strength and courage have changed my life. You gave me the courage to walk away from a toxic relationship with my own family. Thank you for showing me that I can rebuild, too. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat as she read the message. It was short, simple, but it hit her hard. This woman, this stranger, had found the strength to walk away because of what Evelyn had shared. The power of her own story, her own truth, was more than she had ever realized. For the first time, she understood the full weight of her journey. Her story wasn't just about reclaiming her own life, it was about helping others do the same. It was then that Evelyn made a decision. She would start a foundation, one dedicated to helping others who had suffered from financial betrayal and family manipulation, just as she had. She knew there were so many people out there, like Anna, who had been trapped by their circumstances, but who needed just a little bit of support to break free. Evelyn returned home after a few weeks, renewed and with a clear purpose. She began working on the foundation, using her experience, her knowledge, and her story to help others find their way. She shared her journey with those who needed to hear it, always speaking from a place of authenticity and understanding. Her professional life flourished. Invitations to speak at conferences, to share her message of empowerment, came in regularly. She had become a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who had been silenced. People respected her, admired her not for the pain she had endured, but for how she had risen above it. But it wasn't just her career that was thriving. Evelyn's personal life was filled with new friendships, new experiences. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. As she stood in front of a crowd at a major women's conference a year later, she looked out at the sea of faces, each one eager to hear her story. She took a deep breath, smiling, and spoke from her heart. "I've learned that strength isn't about holding on to what we think we should have," she began, her voice steady, her eyes bright. "It's about letting go of the things that no longer serve us, and trusting that when we do, something better always comes. I've learned that we are all capable of more than we think." The applause that followed wasn't just for the words she had spoken, it was for the journey she had taken, the woman she had become. As Evelyn left the stage, she felt a deep sense of peace. The world was open to her in ways it never had been before. She had walked away from the past, yes, but she had also walked towards something far more important, herself. And she knew, without a doubt, that her journey had only just begun. Evelyn stood on the balcony of her apartment, the city lights below her twinkling like stars scattered across the night. The cool breeze brushed against her skin, carrying with it the scents of blooming flowers and distant traffic. For the first time in a long time, she felt a deep sense of peace, as though every moment of her tumultuous past had led her to this place of stillness. She had come so far farther than she had ever imagined. Her life had once been consumed by others, her son, her daughter-in-law, the constant demands and expectations of family and community. Now, it was just Evelyn, the woman she had fought to become, and she wasn't looking back. She had spent the last few months focusing on her foundation, helping women who had suffered similar betrayals, women who had been manipulated, exploited, and silenced. The work was fulfilling, but it was also a reflection of her own healing. By sharing her story, she had not only empowered others, but herself as well. It was her way of taking what had once been used to break her and turning it into something meaningful. The foundation had taken off. Word spread quickly, and soon, Evelyn was invited to speak at conferences and seminars, her voice resonating with those who had lived through their own battles. She was no longer just a victim of betrayal, she was a symbol of strength and resilience. People looked to her for guidance, for hope, and she gave it freely, knowing that her journey had the power to inspire change. Yet, despite the growing success of her work, there was one thing that lingered: the estrangement from David. Though he had reached out, attempting to rebuild the bridge they once shared, Evelyn had already made her decision. She couldn't allow the past to control her any longer. He was a part of her history, but not her future. She had come to understand something vital. Forgiveness didn't mean reopening doors to those who had hurt her. It meant letting go, not for them, but for herself. She didn't need David's validation anymore. The life she was building now was her own. As the months passed, Evelyn's personal growth became even more apparent. She traveled more, embracing new experiences, meeting new people. Each day brought a new adventure, and she reveled in the freedom. Her relationship with Olivia grew stronger, as they both shared their triumphs and challenges. Olivia, once unsure of the changes around her, now saw in her grandmother a woman who had never been more alive. And then, as Evelyn sat in the quiet of her living room, reflecting on everything she had achieved, she knew her work wasn't finished. Her foundation was just the beginning. She was becoming a beacon for other women, empowering them to reclaim their lives, just as she had done. With the world ahead of her, Evelyn embraced the future, knowing she was no longer just surviving, but thriving. She had stepped into her own power, and nothing could take that from her. Evelyn stepped into the next chapter stronger than ever with the world ahead of her.